Good evening. Good to be with you. I'd like you to imagine that there was a community of faith, latter part of the first century, that was starting to believe that the greater church was beginning to lose its way. That it was becoming a little bit too institutional, a little bit too legalistic, a little bit too ritualistic, a little too hierarchical. Imagine further that this community of faith wrote a gospel 20 to 30 years after all the other gospels were written. And they wrote a gospel as a form of correction, as a way to offer their story, their experience of Jesus, which they inherited from the Apostle John, to offer that to the church. A more mystical gospel. A more relational gospel. Imagine further that there's one particular story in this gospel that they identified with such love that it's almost like a movie. One particular story that they saw as autobiographical. That story was so much like their own experience that they felt this story was talking about them. And imagine that story is the man born blind. This is a huge piece of literature in the Christian tradition. There's no way we can talk about all of it. But I'd like to pull a few strands out so we can understand their way of thinking and contrast that to what they were worried about and see if anything in there offers us anything for our journey as we conclude Lent this year. Well, right from the very beginning, we see the core mystical insight is that they saw walking with God, experiencing life as an utter free gift with no preconditions, no prerequisites, no anything. The man born blind exhibited no faith. He had no friends exhibiting faith in his condition. He didn't ask for anything. We don't even know if he was a nice person. We don't even know if he was a person of good conduct or good reputation. We know nothing. He did nothing. Yet he received the life of God. Now, the symbol here for the life of God is fairly gross, I'll admit. Jesus took saliva and made mud and put it on his eyes. Now, into the ancient world way of thinking, they would get something we wouldn't, is they believed the essence of a person, the life of a person were in the fluids of the body, most notably the blood. And so they would understand the commingling of the divine and the human by putting that on his eyes. And as an utter free gift. We get a hint of the way they were thinking in the very first verses of John's Gospel, the famous beginning, where they say that in Jesus was life, and Jesus was the light of all humankind. That's how they started their gospel. And that's what they see here too, is that this sharing of life is not for the privileged, not for the educated, not for those in the right tradition. It's free for everybody, just the way you are. Now, they contrast this, of course, with what you could call the sin story, right? Just to make it clear. So, and Jesus actually says the sin has nothing to do with any of this. Because in that time, and many people still believe today, that the predominant way of relating to God is negotiating about sin. They put an end to that. They said that's not right. We're not separate from God, negotiating our way back, looking for a rescue. It's on your eyes. You already got it. It's already here. Sin has nothing to do with the connection. It doesn't remove it. The connection's there for free. So what happens next? How do they as church, how do we experience in practice this life that's been given? What are we asked to do? How does it work? Well, according to this text, the single most important thing we do to this life that we've received is say yes. Over and over again. He said, yes, I'll go to the pool. Didn't have to go to the pool. Presumably, if he didn't go to the pool, he wouldn't have been healed from the sight, but he would still have the mud, but he needed to say yes. And he did. Then he comes back into the community. And the community says, what happened to you? Tell me your story. Didn't have to. He could have said, I don't feel like it. I need a beer. It's been a long day. But he does. He tells his story. Then, because he tells his story, he's asked to tell his story again to the authorities, the religious leaders, the big shots, the people who know all the answers. And they ask him. By this time, he might be wondering, this is getting a little dicey. He doesn't have to say anything. He can say, I don't know. I'm confused. I'll see y'all later. But no, he answers the question. He engages. The interesting thing is that he initially tells his story factually. I was blind and now I see. But in front of the authorities, what is he asked to do? He's asked to provide meaning and interpretation. They're asking, how did this happen? Who is this Jesus? How does this work? And he's asked to delve into the meaning of his experience. He could have said no, as we could say no. We could say no about diving into the meaning of our experience, right? But he continues to say yes. And by saying yes, he enters in with no plan or with planning or strategy. He enters into ministry. He enters into debate with the authorities about meaning and interpretation. I gave a talk on this years ago to a group where I read his debate followed by what Jesus had debated the chapter before. Almost sounded exactly the same. His cadence, his rhythm, the way he talked, the way he put his argument together. No one's ever heard of somebody being born blind and being healed before, and there has to be some meaning. He sounds like Jesus in the way he's debating these folks. So he goes from story to meaning to ministry, all by just continuing to say yes. There's a flow to this. And then in a minute we'll get to what finally happens is Jesus comes after he's been kicked out. To John's community's way of thinking, the mystical journey is much more about getting up in the morning filled with curiosity and wonder and trying to figure out what's going to happen next. I'm part of a flow. I'm part of a life I've already got. All I've got to do is say yes to it and see what it is. It might be the person serving me coffee. It might be someone I work with who looks really down. It might be someone in the community who needs to be visited. Whatever it might be, I'm flowing. I'm just saying yes. Doesn't mean we never are strategic and don't need a parish council and all that sort of stuff. But generally speaking, the way John's community sees it is that we've already got it. We just have to continue to say yes to it in order to grow and to evolve into who we're meant to be as people and as a community. There's a flow to the mystical journey. And our friends like Richard Rohr, when they write books about the mystics, this is what he says over and over again. He says, if you look at the life of the mystics, they're sort of this peaceful bunch. They sort of like go with the flow. It's not like the ups and downs of the mystical journey throw them off. Some of the most famous mystics in the world were quite ill for much of their lives. They went with it. You know, it's sort of a peaceful flow that goes with the mystical journey. They're trying to give us a correction here that says, whatever we do to institutionalize ourselves, let's not lose the core belief that it's already here and we need to repeatedly say yes. There's one highlight in the text that I must mention, and that's the parents, because they mention it a couple times. And this, again, is the great mystical insight. Churches that celebrate the sin story tend to get hierarchical. And you have people who are more adults, and the people are more like children, right? Well, here we have the parents called before the authorities, and they say 2 times, he's an adult. Ask him. If you got it, and we're saying yes to it, there's nothing keeping us. We're an adult in the spiritual journey. We don't have to go to mom and dad. So this community saw themselves as adults. Now, the sin story resurrects itself again, and that is by kicking him out of the synagogue because Jesus is deemed a sinner. Now picture this for a second. This man born blind is sitting with or standing in front of them. A miracle. But what they're focused on is whether Jesus did this on the Sabbath, not on whether that's a miracle. Really? I mean, how blind can one be? How into the sin story can one be to say, because of a rule, I'm going to miss what is a miracle? Sadly, this is still with us. Just a couple weeks ago, I'm choking on my morning coffee reading about a brand new law in the country of Ghana, another country that made it criminal to be gay or lesbian. Not criminal to act gay and lesbian, criminal to be gay or lesbian. The law. You're thrown in jail. It's worse. You can go on. And you go, there's a generation of medical science saying, understanding what this is. I mean, it's 99.9% of the people who study these things. How can you? Because it's a sin. I'm not going to look at the science. I'm not going to look at the joy of a loving relationship or the true holiness of people of various orientation. I'm not going to look at any of that. I'm just going to, because it's a sin. Right? It reminds me of one of my clients when I was practicing law. A dear friend. He had 2 children. His eldest was a boy who came out as gay in college, ended up becoming a doctor, worked in homeless shelters, married a wonderful guy, just incredible life. And he talked about him with just glowing terms. And then one day we were in breakfast. I said, "Well, what are you doing for Christmas this year? Who's going to?" I said, "Is your son and his partner coming to your house?" He goes, "Oh, no, they can't come to my house. I'm not going to participate in sin." I mean, you're going, he spends most of his time talking about how unbearably holy this guy is. And all this great stuff going on in his life, that anyone would want to be this person. Oh, no, I can't do that. So this is still here, ladies and gentlemen. The sin story persists. Very frustrating. So what can we take away from this? One thing I did this week that I would commend to you in your practice or whatever is, I was really struck by being more intentional about yes. Being more aware of saying yes. And what I did, I'm not particularly strong at contemplative prayer, trust me. And when I do contemplative prayer, I need a helping word to kind of keep the thoughts to come back to, because the thoughts go all over. And the word I'm starting to use the last week is I breathe in and I breathe out yes. I'm saying yes. What do you want to do today? What do you have in mind? It's already here. Everything I need is here. What do you want to do today? What are we going to do today? I want to say yes. Yes. That's the flow. That's the gift this community is trying to give the church by telling us their story of how they knew Jesus. Amen? Amen.